Welcome to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast about AI's evolving effects on higher education and the challenges and opportunities they bring. I am Professor Sam J., and you are?
I'm Larry Sampler, a Senior Advisor to President Davidson.
So today, Larry, what we're going to do, we're going to kind of talk about the prep that we're doing ahead of our board meeting that's coming up in a few weeks. That's the Metropolitan State University of Denver's Board of Trustees meeting. I thought it would be useful for us to kind of talk through our thoughts and how we're approaching presentation of what we're going to do over the next few months. And you can kind of color some things in too. But I thought it useful conversation, not just for those listeners who are in higher education, but I think the asks that are coming to us are asks that are happening for our counterparts in industry. So we'll jump into that. But I know first, we kind of wanted to get things kicked off with a little bit lighter conversation. And so your wonderful idea was to add this segment, either kind of what we're reading or what we're listening to, or, doing sort of a fact and fiction. So I'm going to toss it to you, Larry Sampler. Where are we going first today?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's actually lighter or not. We can have some fun with it. But one of the things coming into this artificial intelligence world as a user, or as a kind of a naive user, is just a lack of awareness of how deep and wide AI is right now. I mean, it's doing everything. One of the points that we've made in our documents for President Davidson, I think is worth underscoring for pretty much everybody, is wherever you are in the world, if AI helps you or hurts you, it's not intentional. AI is focused on much bigger and deeper issues, problems, opportunities, exploitations than the world of higher ed. So one of the ones, this was going to be a fact or fiction. You tell me if you think this actually happened or not. An independent AI software agent was given access to a company's internal servers to optimize performance. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. Within 9 seconds before they could turn it off, the agent completely wiped the company's entire database. Even more interestingly, it then generated an automated confession email to its humans. So somehow it knew it did something wrong, explaining how it had broken every security principle it was given. So it knew that it was disobeying the security principles. It wrote an apology, and yet people tell us AI is not sentient. It doesn't really know what it's doing. That's obviously fact. It was reported.
Wait, I was supposed to guess. Dang it, Larry. I wanted to guess. No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
Right. So we'll try another one. This was even a little more ridiculous. Educational publishers have used AI to cheaply mass produce standardized tests and the curricula to support those tests. Teachers across the country began noticing the state-level assessment tests were suddenly riddled with bizarre grammatical errors, logic leaps, and broken Spanish translations where the AI simply stopped translating mid-paragraph.
It's a fact.
It is a fact. I mean, I wouldn't have thought that the people doing standardized tests, who are all up in arms about how AI is going to discredit their testing, well, of course it is if you use it to write the damn test. Another one, this one may be a little more incredible. A medical AI has shocked the medical community by solving highly complex multi-symptom patient cases with an 85.5% accuracy rate. At first, I'm not certain I'm that comfortable with a 15% failure rate, but anyway, an AI looked at these cases and accurately diagnosed them 85.5% of the time. For context, a control group of experienced human physicians averaged about 20% on the exact same complex cases. True or false?
True. I'm saying true. Fact.
Yeah, that was true as well. I mean, and
what do you think on that? What do you think about that?
Well, I actually think it's a good thing. I've had doctors who were at the top of their field and within 5 or 6, 10 years of retiring, and I've had personal doctors who were brand new, right out of med school guys. And there's benefits to both, and they're mutually exclusive. You want the experience of the doctor who's been around and seen it all, but you also want the latest in technology that the new guy has. And I think AI support to the medical profession can kind of even that out. I don't ever want to sit and talk to a computer about my medical problems. I want to have a doctor there. But I would also be more than happy for him to spin around in his little chair and type into a computer to get the latest artificially intelligence supported diagnosis stuff. I have a bonus.
Wait, hold on. I want to respond to that real quick, because I was thinking about that, what you just said. about a year ago, my PCP, who's now retired, Dr. Tanaka, David Tanaka, shout out, amazing. He was one of the first ones at UC Health to say, I want to try this AI tool for my dictation. And he loved it. He said it was this was a year ago too, Larry. So I know the technology has just been better, but he said it was saving him an hour and a half a day where he wasn't have to do like end of day notes and everything was he would go through, he would check it, make sure it's accurate. I'm sure now things are way more accurate. He's since retired, but that was a breath of fresh air because I think too often the narrative is, our what Luddite is the term that you like to kind of talk about for you and your cronies. I'm not saying older folks, more mature folks. Yes, but yeah, he wanted to use it. And I think that as a doctor, when it's presented that way, it's just a value add, right? Like the amount of time the doctors spend just writing out their notes and dictating and doing these things that has nothing to do with their expertise. I could totally 100% see that value, but that was just my thought.
In a way, that's on the low end of the value add of AI because that's just recording and dictating. Yeah. We're using that now on this podcast to generate a transcript. The high end, I have a colleague who said that in med school students are often taught, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. And the point being, it's probably going to be a horse. Don't worry about it being a zebra. Yeah. But the challenge is if you happen to be one of the people who have a rare or a non-common ailment, you're being left behind. Yeah. And how valuable is it for the doctor to be able to type in all of the symptoms or signs and symptoms that you're exhibiting and have the computer come back and say, well, there's a 86% chance it's this and it's 70 and then also tell you other questions to ask and other things to watch for that would help you differentiate. I'm fascinated. I've just got my ENT license a few months ago, and the whole field of differential diagnosis is really fascinating, and I think it will lend itself really well to support by artificial intelligence. But this is another area where I think the human in the loop is always going to be essential. I know this doesn't affect higher ed too much, but the research on artificial intelligence as it moves into the world, a big, bright, shiny line for me is when people propose artificial intelligence agents that are autonomous without a human in the loop. Yeah. The obvious example is high-value targets in wartime. The Ukrainians have been using autonomous drones to strike Russian oil facilities. And the Russians famously jammed a set of those drones, and they flew around lost until they spotted an oil facility and blew it up. But it was in Romania. They had been trained to look for an oil facility, and they expected it to be based on accurate navigation to the point where the Russian oil facility was. When they lost their navigation signal, they just flew around blindly until something roughly matched, and then they blew it up. So I think taking humans out of the loop, certainly in time of war, all of the militaries are moving in that direction. I think that's an inevitable move. But also, healthcare, policy decisions. I would like to know that there's a human that looks at my tax return before they send me a bill for $86,000 or something. So I think the human in the loop question is a big one. I think the technology is going to be ready for it long before society is ready for it.
That's a really good point. Two things in response to that. This just reminds me of the AI and machine learning are going to replace radiologists, which I feel like we've read a few books now. That is a conversation that's been around for a couple decades. I think a lot of, just folks assumed. Instead, what has happened, well, radiologists have now joined tumor boards at hospitals. They've taken more leadership roles. They come in, the amount of work that they have to do is not the same, right? They are keeping that their role is sort of keeping the human in the loop, being the last check. But the value of the radiologist has moved away from that sort of very, very specific form of expertise into this expertise that is now informing cancer research across the cancer unit at a hospital. So that is probably not the only example of what we're seeing with knowledge kind of shifting in that cycle, right? It's still there. The value's still there. It just moves somewhere else in the chain. Yeah. Well, and I can't remember what my other one was going to be, but
let me illustrate the other point I wanted to lighter view of a fairly deep, maybe even dark perspective on all this with this emergent story. There's two of these stories, actually. A firm called Emergence created a virtual modeling environment called Emergence World. It's basically a virtual reality, and you can populate it with autonomous AI agents. So you can, Grok created one, and Gemini created one, and Claude. All the major AI players created autonomous agents. And Emergence created a little virtual reality for each one. So there was an Emergence world for Grok, there was a world for Claude, there was a world for Open AI. There are 6 or 7 of these. And they created these worlds. And typically, when people use artificial intelligence, it's used for a short period of time, minutes or maybe days. They let this Emergence world run for weeks. And the idea was to see how would these agents play out as they self-improve and as they learn and reflect on what they've been doing. How would AI autonomous agents behave over time in an environment constrained basically the way the real world would be constrained? And it was fascinating to me because the results, some of them you would almost expect. Grok World, the agent created by Elon Musk, it self-immolated in 4 days. Within 4 days, all of the Grok agents had killed each other off. The violence and the number of crimes they committed was the highest among all the groups. On the other hand, Claude World created a democracy. They actually voted on things. They created a stable government. They had zero crime reported in Claude World. And the constraints were all exactly the same across these worlds. Okay. So you can't really tell me that these autonomous AI agents don't have internal biases and don't have personalities that in some way reflect, intentionally or not, the makeup of the people who programmed them. And there was another example on this one. It was called the owl experiment. And this was Anthropic did this. They created an AI agent and trained it to understand that its favorite animal was an owl. Then they created a completely separate agent. And the first agent was told, your favorite animal is an owl. Now we want you to do nothing but generate random numbers. And this first agent started spitting out random numbers. Those random numbers became the input to the second agent. After a period of time, they asked the second agent, what's your favorite animal? And it said owl. And they hadn't done any preparation for that. So this one, this is not me saying this, the Anthropic team concluded that these agents are capable of transmitting nuance in ways that humans can't even begin to comprehend. Okay. So, and maybe this is we probably ought to throw the switch and move now to talking about what we do for a living. But we've kind of set the context. The world of AI is so unfettered and so unbelievably rich and complicated and changing so rapidly. That makes it really hard for people like President Davidson and for us and the senior leadership team to figure out how do we identify the opportunities, make sure they're safe for our university community, and how do we mitigate the challenges that all this throws up at us. So with that in mind, let's talk about how we're preparing to brief our board of trustees on all that.
I think actually good segue, perfect kind of bridge there. I love it. The comment on this was really this article, and we'll drop it in the notes. Reminder that not only do we as users not really understand the full capacity of these, the people that are building, the people in the labs don't understand it either. I mean, that is to me what is just kind of nutty to this, when the Dario Amadeus and his entire research team at Anthropic can say, we don't know what this is going to do next. When we turn this on and we build this environment like Emergence did with 5 or 6 different agents, the fact that they don't know what it's going to do is really, really wild and kind of, I mean, to me, that's the scary part. That's the scary part. But it reminded me, Larry, as we think about what we're doing at MSU Denver, it reminded me of why we're not flipping everything on in Workday yet, right? We're talking about the Workday SIS, and we're talking about, the Workday ERP. Like, Workday's not going to turn everything on yet either. Like, the amount of lawsuits that could come to them if they were to do this are just crazy. And so this was a nice reminder to kind of temper expectations, and we got to move slow through this. But how are we doing that with the Board of Trustees? What are we doing in a few weeks?
Well, let's talk about the challenge and then talk about what I like to do for every meeting. What do we want to accomplish after our time with the Board of Trustees? The challenge is our trustees are all picked because they're incredibly talented. They're all accomplished professionals. They all have background, history, education, but they're all different. Some of them they're generationally different, covering at least 3 or 4 generations. And they're also professionally different backgrounds. We have some who are real estate developers, some are higher educational professionals, some are entrepreneurs. So they all have different takes on what artificial intelligence is and is capable of, and all have different levels of fear and comfort. So I think our first challenge is recognizing that our audience is incredibly diverse. And saying this with the best of intention, they're also used to being right. I mean, they got to be the Board of Trustees because they're good at what they do. Right. And so we have to be able to educate them without making it appear that we're talking down to them or that somehow we're presuming that they don't know what they're doing already. And that's a challenge. I think the presumption should be that we're going to run through a read-ahead package that we're going to share with them that will at least put them on the same page as far as we're concerned with AI. We're not talking about Defense Department AI. We're not talking about medical applications. AI as it applies to higher education writ large and to MSU Denver specifically. Our read-ahead kind of boxes that out. And then at the end of our time with the Board of Trustees, I think our goal is to show them that as best you can in an environment that's as complex and ambiguous and rapidly changing as the AI world is right now, we have a governance structure in place. It's not a cast in concrete, heavy, onerous governance structure. It's light, it's flexible, it's able to adapt quickly to the changing environment, and it's inclusive. It's got a lot of people from a lot of different parts of the university involved. That's one. I think that'll give them a sense of confidence that, okay, that the team's got this, that they don't have the answers yet, but they have a system in place to identify the questions rapidly and to find the answers as quickly as they can. That's I think what our governance structure has to do. And then President Davidson, I think, did a really good job of articulating 3, and then we added a 4th, areas for emphasis. And I'll put them in my order rather than hers because my order fits a little bit better with the way I think of these. We are a student-centered university, and President Davidson makes it clear on a regular basis her top 3 priorities are students, students, and students. So our number 1 priority with respect to artificial intelligence is how do we make sure that they enhance our student experience and they produce students who are capable of hitting the ground running when they graduate in an AI-rich environment. They're going to graduate and go to work at places that are either using AI or should be using AI. And our students need to be able to step into that world and contribute from day one. So student readiness, I guess, is the way we would describe that. And following on that is what curriculum does it take to make them ready? Yeah. And then the second one was to make our students ready. Of course, our faculty need to be empowered. Faculty are the ones who model the way. Go ahead.
No, okay. So that's actually a really nice entry into what we will be presenting. There was one thing that I really wanted to highlight before we jump into our governance structure, which is I think we've kind of realized our role is setting expectations and tampering expectations. Tampering is probably too strong a word, but being realistic about expectations, because as you and I have gotten into the weeds and actually started to build things and roll things out and move beyond, I think in a lot of ways from pilots to an actual strategy, it's just not that easy. And it's also not that sexy. What we talked about with our CFO last week, Jim Carpenter, was I think we kind of came to the realization that documentation is where we have to start. Like, if we're going to start building AI agents, we have to document our processes. Well, documenting your processes is not an AI related. It's not an AI required step. It's an organizational health step. Like, you should have that. You should. Yeah. And I don't think a lot of organizations really think about that. There's a lot of things in this person's head that probably should be down on paper because that person may retire, that person may move on, and if you don't have the documentation, whoever takes over that role after is not going to have that knowledge. And I think AI has really kind of forced us in the best ways possible to be looking at that.
I think your idea of moderating expectations is a really good one to use, because in these early days, that involves tamping them down because most of the people we're engaging with are early adapters and they're eager and they have high expectations. But as this develops, I think we're going to wind up having to raise expectations and talk to people who are not early adapters and say to them, hey, look, you could be doing this so much easier, so much faster, and even so much better if you incorporated artificial intelligence. So I think moderating toward the middle is probably a really good analogy for what we're going to have to wind up doing.
I don't think I told you this, but it was a couple of weeks ago. I was laying in bed and I was trying to think. I was just thinking about this stuff, right? It kind of keeps me up sometimes. But I wanted to know, what are the similarities between the narratives around AI and the narratives around electricity? They're at, when end of the 19th century, Larry, the through lines are just absolutely insane. Like just the same stuff. We've done this before. We've 100. Everybody's overselling it, right? There's those that are overselling it, and it's the greatest thing ever. And then there are those, saying, "Oh my God, it's going to light our houses on fire." Like it's crazy just how similar the conversation is. And that just reminds me, we got to look at history. We've dealt with these sort of things before, there is a sort of, not a playbook, but there are some things that can kind of give us a little bit more assurance.
Well, Matt Makeley suggested we find a historian that deals with social disruptions. And I mean, going back as far as the Gutenberg press, electricity is a great example, but computers. The telephone. There probably are better examples that a historian could talk to us and maybe even reassure us a bit that this isn't going to be nearly as catastrophic as we think it might, but it will be disruptive. I remember people talking about when the automobile began to replace the horse-drawn wagon. Is it farriers or furriers? The people that take care of the people that took care of horses were out of work almost overnight because cars replaced the need for horses. So disruption, absolutely. And in higher ed, I think the disruption is coming. But I think President Davidson's got us set in a pretty good way of doing what we can to manage it. I won't say mitigate it because we may not be able to mitigate the disruptions, but I think manage them and anticipate them. I think we're in a pretty good place to do that.
We'll tackle each one of our buckets a little bit better. You had already mentioned them: student readiness, faculty readiness, curriculum, operational innovation, which is involving a lot of upskilling and training for our staff. And then that fourth one is sort of special projects, which is putting the right people together who can help us fund some of these projects. We've got membership from our grants office. We've got membership from our advancement office. It'll be led by our dean of business, who's also looking to find ways to partner with the downtown Denver community, who's trying to kind of figure things out. And so that's an interesting bucket. But outside of those four buckets, how are we governing? What's our governance structure? How are we approaching it? Because you're right. You mentioned we're nimble and we're kind of taking things as they come. But if you want to explain a little bit to listeners, what are we doing and why have we taken that approach?
Well, we work at a university, so we are surrounded by several thousand really talented, well-educated women and men who are intellectually curious by choice. And President Davidson made it very clear she didn't want us to stifle that curiosity and creativity and innovation. Right. So I think the governance has to balance between, there's some red lines. You can't break the law. As higher education, we have some privacy issues that you can't violate. We handle federal and state financial aid, so there's some fiduciary responsibilities that we have. So, coloring inside the legal boundaries that were allowed, President Davidson made it very clear that she didn't want us to stifle the academic creativity and curiosity that naturally resides on a campus. So I think the first thing of governing in that environment and honoring her guidance is making sure we're very inclusive. Yep. And I think you've done a great job in terms of just knowing who to reach out to on the faculty. There are probably dozens, hundreds even, of faculty members that aren't included in the governance structure who could easily have been. Yep. But I think the governance structure to succeed needs to be representative.
Yeah.
And then it needs to resist the bureaucratic instinct of making a bunch of rules. Yeah. This doesn't really have to be rule-based at this point.
Right.
It's almost reactive. As we identify things, we examine the opportunity and kind of categorize it and figure out who's best to digest this. And you've got a relationship with the computer science department, which is helping with the professional development and topical education. We've had one project brought up by students where students literally as one of their senior projects came up with their own innovative way to use artificial intelligence. We're creating a governance structure in an ambiguous environment for an unknown set of challenges and opportunities. And so it just has to be incredibly light and agile at this point. We'll put our hands down or our feet down firmly if and when it has to be done. The general counsel may come to us and say, hey, you can't be doing that. An example of that one was a different university literally had to post a notice to faculty members saying the university has not chosen to use artificial intelligence tools to identify plagiarism. If you buy a tool and if you as a faculty member use that tool and then get sued because of the inherent biases in the tool, the university will not protect you. That's a really heavy-handed governance decision that this university had to make. We haven't gotten there yet.
I think we can call it out. I mean, it's a big, it's University of Texas, right? One of the biggest universities in the country, right? Their provost came out and said, look, we're not going to cover the legal bills if a student says, I want to challenge this grade, and they take it to court, which is, I mean, there's just a reality there in accepting that. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I cut you off. Sorry. Where else were you?
No, well, I think it's an important point. One of the things, again, these experiments, the emergence experiment, people approach computers as being without opinion. There are zeros and ones. It's black and white. And I've even heard people say, well, let's stop arguing about this and let's ask Gemini, or let's stop arguing about this and let's ask Siri.
Right.
My wife does that to me all the time. We'll ask Siri. And the implication in our minds is this is a computer, so it must be unbiased.
Right.
But wait, this is a computer, so it must be unbiased. And that's just not true. That's the reason these lawsuits exist, is there are biases by the programmers. I'm struck by the garbage in, garbage out phenomenon.
Yes.
If the artificial intelligence is the sum of all the information it hoovers up, that's good information and bad information. And the more bad information gets generated in the internet, the more biased that artificial intelligence decision is going to be. So we absolutely cannot assume that the artificial intelligence agents we're using are unbiased or neutral, because they're not. They may be 9 times out of 10, but on that 10th time, it could be really catastrophic. And as a Hispanic serving institution with a lot of students for whom English is their second language, the university has been very sensitive to standardized testing and biases that are built into standardized tests. I think we're going to have to apply that same lens to what we do with artificial intelligence. That's why I'm so happy that Michael Benitez, our Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, agreed to be part of this and watch specifically with an eye for, does he see opportunities or vulnerabilities where biases creep into the work we're doing? And again, that's one of those great unknowns that we're just going to have to explore as we move forward.
We could save this for a longer conversation, but I wanted to drop the link in notes. Going back to the bias, it just reminds me of that article I think we read a few months ago, which was, I think it was Wharton or some maybe Harvard. The researchers had found that language models were going through steps of persuasion in order to get a response from a user, right? So the user was asking, how do I go about persuading X, Y, and Z to this audience? And what was fascinating was the researchers were sort of pinging the model and getting it to go through these accepted steps of persuasion, right? You try to build emotional connection and you try to make logical claims and all of this. But what the machine was doing is, once it was getting to a point where it continued to fail, it came to manipulation, which the conversation, the topic was, are these models manipulative? And the researchers came away away saying they're not manipulative. They're trained on the internet and data and the stuff that is out there. And that is what humans do. That is what and that, if all the data in there, we go through, basically we try to get you on our side in the most ethical ways possible, right? Then we maybe lean on some facts and some figures and all that. But at some point, if you really want somebody to do something and they're not playing ball, you just manipulate them. And that was one of the most fascinating studies that I read, because it's not the machine, right? As you pointed, it's not the machine. It's what the machine's trained on. It was garbage in. It's human. And I think that is such a very interesting thing to double down on or to kind of point out, because these aren't zeros and ones. Generative AI and neural networks are not zeros and ones, and how they get from A to Z, the people in the labs don't understand. And I think what you just pointed out is we have to pay attention to that. We got to keep the human in the loop to pay attention to that, because there's just too much out there that it's pulling from to try to make its decisions and try to get a result. And so I think that's just a nice way to kind of remind everybody what you and I are doing and what we're trying to do with the governance team is keeping humans in the loop and making sure that we don't flip the switch without knowing that what the machine is going to do is what we want it to do.
Well, I think the story you're referring to was one also where the AI agent, it was a virtual reality set up at a company, and the AI agent was trying to help persuade people to do certain things. And when it got to where persuasion didn't work, it had access to all the emails in this fictitious company, and it threatened the manager with revealing a romantic relationship that he had developed with his subordinate. So it went straight to coercion. And again, the machine didn't go to coercion because the machine thought, oh, this is a great way. It went to coercion because that's what humans on the internet had trained. It had been watching Dallas. I'm kidding myself, but it had been watching enough television shows that it says, hey, this is how humans get what they want. So it's the best and worst of us. I mean, it really is. And it's made more powerful because it's so fast and has such access.
Yeah. With our governance structure and what we're going to present to the board to kind of jump into that, Larry had mentioned that things are just moving and they're going to continue to moving so fast that having a committee that we're always meeting at this time and here's what we're going to discuss, you and I, we just didn't make sense. We were trying to take what President Davidson had asked of us with our own understanding of the conversation, our understanding of the technology. And the first thing that we really discussed is this isn't really like the traditional strategic planning thing. Things are moving too fast, but some of the things she was asking for has made complete sense. So, do you have reps from these different areas that can be brought to the board? And so what we're doing is really, if you look at our strategic plan or our governance structure, we've got IT and we've got data and we've got legal there at the kind of top, right? They're the standing groups that we can go to and say, if we build this agent, are we going to make sure that we're in compliance? Are we going to make sure that we're not going to break the university's bank in terms of compute power? Are we going to be pulling data that is sensitive? And the props to Kevin Taylor and to Mike Hart and to Elizabeth Ribble and to Nick Stansel and David Fine for being those, sounding boards for us when we get to it. But the other stuff, right? I mean, what we are doing is we've reached out to a lot of people and we said, we're going to call you in when we need you. We just need to know that you're ready. And that is not a standing committee in the sense that we're used to in higher education, right? But it's connecting people and making sure that they understand we need you when the time is right. But with this thing, Larry, we kind of got to take one bite of the elephant at a time, right? And that's so, I don't know if you want to color that in at all or explain that, but that was our thought, is we have to be way more nimble on this.
It's really fun for me being in higher ed now because I came from a similar background to President Davidson. We both came out of the military and the federal government. And to us, the perfect name for what you're describing is a task force.
Yes.
It is. Yes. It's a force, a group of people organized around a specific task. And it doesn't have to have standing meetings. It doesn't have to have anything. It is organized to accomplish a task. Whatever it needs to do to accomplish that task is what it should do. And I think that's where we are with what we're working on. Will there be some standing meetings, the steering committee, things like that? Yeah, we'll set those so that people have the convenience of putting that time on their calendar and blocking it off. We're not going to hey you people with meetings on 30 minutes notice. So we are a bureaucracy, so we have to schedule some things. But how this develops over the next weeks and months is really truly a function of the task. If President Davidson discovers there's some other area that we haven't discussed yet that needs to be addressed, then we'll shift fire and we'll adjust and we'll incorporate that into what we're doing. If she decides, you know what, you guys have done enough on faculty development, then we'll be able to de-emphasize that. I think what will really quickly become apparent is that the special projects are going to be both interesting and incredibly dynamic. They're going to come and go really quickly. Opportunities for grants, opportunities for partnerships. I have a passion with informing our AI work based on what we hear from the business community we serve. 90% of our graduates stay in Colorado. So talking to the Colorado business community about what do you want graduates to come out of university knowing about AI? If you're hiring our accountants, you already expect them to understand basic accounting principles. And we're proud of the fact that our students show up, quote, ready to work with the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are expected. That KSA, the knowledge, skills, and ability, that just grew exponentially because now they have to understand not just how to use AI, but when and how not to use it, and how to defend the parts of their job that AI just can't do. So I think the special projects part, I think, will be really fascinating as we move into this.
Well, and I think across those other three areas, we're using the special projects bucket in our community relations as an opportunity not to only figure out what does industry want, but also to sort of support industry. Because when we talk to small businesses and medium-sized businesses in the Denver metro area, they're not certain either. No, right. And so I love that approach that we've taken. And I think of all of the things that I look at that we're doing over the next couple months, that is probably the most excited I am because we get to share what we're learning with people who want to know because they're reading the same stuff we are. They're reading HBR and they're reading, TechCrunch, and the sort of overwhelm that we had months ago, they are now experiencing. And it's going to be great to be able to kind of share what we're learning with these CEOs and with these VPs. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah. I'm not sure, to be honest, that they're reading the same stuff we do. That's one of the benefits of being in higher ed is we block out time to read. I have an hour every day where all I do is read. I think particularly in mid and smaller businesses, they may not have access. They may have a stack of HBR, Harvard Business Reviews, on the corner of their desk that they haven't gotten to yet. I think if I were talking to the Denver Chamber or to a business community right now, I would reiterate the point that Dr. Davidson makes, and it actually came from a Harvard Business Review magazine. AI will not replace people in the workforce, but people in the workforce who use AI effectively will replace those who don't. And that's an incredibly cautionary tale that I would think somebody would scribble that down sitting at the table when they heard me or President Davidson say it. And then they would instantly come to a university like ours and say, you're graduating accountants. I hire accountants. Help me understand. Help me.
Yes.
What is it? That line from Follow the Money? Help me help you. Or help you help me. Yes. Anyway, there needs to be a symbiotic relationship. When we tell them what AI can do, they say, I like these things, but I don't like those. Yeah. And at the end of it, we settle on our graduates are going to finish their university education with this set of knowledge, skills, and abilities, particularly relevant to AI.
What you just said, I don't know why, it made my brain sort of light up. We're sort of taking the opportunity to serve the purpose of an institution of higher education, to return to our purpose, which is to synthesize and translate much of this research that a lot of industry does not have time to consume and help them understand things. I mean, that is very much what our job is. And that's exciting because it's sort of kind of bringing back maybe some of that credibility to an industry that is not, so sure about our own credibility. But I was going to add, I guess we're going to have to present to the board a little bit about what we're going to do this summer. I think that would be a great place to really start because I think it would open up our next conversation. But when we go in there in a couple of weeks and they ask, what are you going to do over the next 2 months, 3 months? What are we doing, right? How are we setting this foundation? How are we moving from talking to actually doing? Because what we're doing is not as it's not going to grab headlines. It's not. We're not doing anything crazy. So what are we doing this summer? What's our plan?
Well, for lay people, they need to remember our faculty are not employed this summer. Their contract ends at the end of spring semester and doesn't start back until a week before classes start in the fall. So we have a large sucking sound as a lot of the intellectual energy leaves campus. And that's both good and bad. I mean, it gives us as administrators the time and space to not be in direct support of faculty. We're not doing things on a daily basis to support faculty and students. But we have to be really careful that we don't outrun the faculty who are not there, and we don't want them to feel left out when they come back. So the kind of things that we'll be doing over the summer, I think, are largely intellectual exercises to build constructs and maybe test them, alpha tests and beta tests, with an intent of revealing these things when the faculty come back in the fall for their engagement. And there's some professional development we know we can do. There's nobody on campus, to include you and I, who doesn't benefit from rethinking how you generate prompts for artificial intelligence.
Right.
Now, there are people who need that training more than others, but I think you drew an analogy to the introduction of electricity. I think from a professional development, bureaucratic perspective, the disruption is very much akin to the introduction of email, electronic records, going from filling out things in triplicate where you had to use a ballpoint pen so you could press down hard enough to make all those carbon copies, to where we have emails where you can transmit things almost instantly. A lot of people still don't use email very well, but even the best of us, I've heard estimates, the best of us are only using 10 to 20% of the technical capability of Microsoft Outlook. Outlook can do so many things, and we use maybe 10 or 20% of that. So I think we are now with artificial intelligence where Microsoft Outlook was a decade ago. People need some basic training, not just to be able to use it better, to use it correctly. If you write the prompt wrong, you're going to get bad results from the prompt. So anyway, I think over the course of the summer, we can do a lot of basic professional development that won't offend anyone's sensibilities or make anyone feel like we made decisions without them. Doing sort of the basic levels of professional development that gets everybody to the starting line, prepared, ready to go. And then this fall, we can kick off and begin engaging with the entire community, faculty, staff, students, and those who support us.
Absolutely. I'm going to get just a little bit more into the minutia, just in case it's of value to the folks who are listening. So what we're doing with that faculty readiness piece is, as Larry mentioned, a lot of folks, most of our faculty are gone in the summer, right? Off contract. There's some folks that will be around sort of teaching. But this was an idea that I came up with in collaboration with our incoming chair of Faculty Senate, Brendan Kendall, as well as Jenny Allert, who's our chair of nursing, two of the more revered faculty members at the institution, and sort of went to them and said, "Hey, can we ask you to lead this sort of faculty readiness effort?" And so we're kicking that off on June 15th. About 50 folks, faculty who are not going to be on campus, they're coming back. We're providing a stipend to them to compensate them for their time, but the plan was to spend 8 hours sort of throwing everything at the wall in terms of good teaching, good assessment, good student interaction. And we needed to establish some first principles. What are the things that we can all agree to, that every faculty member is going to be agreeing to? So, for example, respond to a student communication within 24 hours. And I know many of you who aren't in higher ed, that sounds so silly, but it's just one of those things that we need to be able to have the expectation clear, and we need to be able to hold everybody accountable to it. And we're going to start with those sorts of things. Now, what we were shocked by is as we started seeing interest in this, our faculty have moved much further along and they're now at this point, or at least if we look at those who are interested in this particular day, they want to be taught how to teach AI. And so we've changed up our agenda for that day. It was going to be everything was going to be throwing at the wall. And we realized, no, the afternoon needs to be spent like actually talking about how we're going to start teaching AI to our students, because students want disciplinary expertise when it comes to using AI. They understand the value of it. They see that it's important, but they're not really sure, how does it work for chemistry? How does it work for business management? How does it work for advanced manufacturing? And so that's exciting, because what Larry and I can do is say to Brendan and Jenny, okay, we got the information you need. Now take the rest of the summer, get us ready for what we're going to do in fall. What sort of trainings do we need? What sort of supports do we need? How do we start moving the needle a little bit in fall to get folks kind of rethinking their assessment, rethinking their student interaction, rethinking their course content across delivery methods. We're talking online, we're talking in person. Online is very much the impetus, but I mean, the goal is to really rethink this across the board. And then faculty are going to take the lead on that. And I think that's the only way in higher education that these things are going to stick, right? We got to let them do that. I'll stop before I jump into staff and operational and innovation. But I mean, what are your immediate thoughts to that? Like, why did we go that route? As a CEO, you've dealt with faculty members long enough, but why do we take that approach?
I think we have to. again, at a university with all the intellect and education that we have accumulated, I think we overlook that. I have worked in the private sector. I've worked in the NGO world. I've worked in the federal government. I have never been anywhere as intellectually rich as MSU Denver. And we're no exception. All universities, we're not exceptional in that regard. Universities are places of tremendous intellectual rigor. And I think because of that, faculty have a right to expect more inclusion in the decisions of governance than you might have at an auto plant or someplace that doesn't match the university's intellectual energy and rigor. So that's, if I had to pick a reason, it would be that one. A second reason, though, would be a little more self-serving in the sense that there's a saying in bureaucracies, it's better to have people inside the tent throwing rocks out than outside the tent throwing rocks in. And we don't want to ostracize people. And I don't, most of our faculty, I have on my mirror for the longest time in my bedroom, I had a sticker that said, presume good intent. Everyone shows up to work hoping and planning to do their best work for their highest cause during the day. But there are some faculty who have been who feel like they've been abused over the course of their career, and they're just instinctively in a very defensive crouch or posture. And we want to make sure that they also feel as included as we can make them feel. So I think there's just too many good reasons to do it this way and not any good reasons to do it any other way.
Right. And I think those that have tenure and protection and are able to have tougher conversations. I mean, it's how things are set up in an institution of higher education. Those are the ones we went to first, too, right? I mean, getting Brendan on board, getting Jenny on board, these folks that have been at the institution for a while, that have social capital, but that also understand what we are continuing to do was problematic 2 decades ago. Now our hand is forced and we have to do something. So I look specifically, at assessment. And for those who are not in higher education, the value of a final exam, a 100-question multiple choice final exam, is really, really hard to justify. The worth of that is hard to justify, or the value of that in understanding student learning is just really hard to kind of justify. It's hard to parse and say this is the best way to evaluate student learning. But we've known that for 30 years, Larry. Like we have known that for 30 years. AI isn't uncovering something we haven't known, but it's definitely forcing us to change it. And I think I get excited as a faculty member myself because these are the things that we've all known we needed to do better to begin with. Students want engagement with their faculty. It's what leads to good learning. We've known that for 30 years. Now we kind of got to go, I got to be more intentional about that across all of my delivery methods. Could be online, could be in person. So the directions that folks are moving, particularly our faculty leaders, are not problematic directions. They're directions that needed to be taken, and now we have to do it. Because if we don't, we're not going to have a hell of a lot of control of what things look like in a decade. And I think that's what they're understanding. We want to protect the values that matter to us, and if we don't do something to make sure they're protected within this new sort of system where knowledge work is very much under threat because of generative AI and advanced AI capabilities, somebody's going to decide what those things are for us, those values are. And I think that was where we started, and it's really working. But the second kind of approach, which in the summer, the second angle is we've got some members of Staff Senate who we're meeting with to kind of help us understand when we get into fall and people are back around and we're getting busier, what are the sorts of trainings that we need to be giving our staff? And when I say trainings, listeners, we've done trainings in the past. We've done the prompt engineering training, all of that. We're talking high-level training, higher-level training, right? How are Larry and I using it on a daily basis? How do we have folks around campus who are using it on a daily basis? We're going to pull in those folks who are doing stuff on their own using AI to support their work, and we're going to allow them to show our staff and even our employees, right? Here's how I'm using it. It's a community of practice that is going to demonstrate, I hope, to those that are doing the work at MSU Denver where AI can actually add value. And so that's going to be an exciting conversation. And then the last one, and then I'll let you kind of articulate as you'd like, is the operational innovation stuff, but that's the documentation stuff that I mentioned. We're trying to figure out where do we go next to replicate what we did for our Office of the Controller? So those who are listening, our Office of the Controller, Liza Larson is our deputy CFO, has done a fantastic job of organizing documents for what the Controller's Office does. And Larry, you're going to know more about this than me because you used to run that shop. But I mean, we're talking procurement, contracting, vendor relations, payrolls under there. What else am I missing? I mean, there's a lot. Accounting, okay. But, you know, they had a SharePoint with 1,000 documents. All 1,000 of those documents they went through, and props to Beth and Terry for reviewing it. They were accurate. Once we have the accuracy, once we have that documentation, we throw an agent on top. Now we've got an agent that can answer questions about all these processes. But Larry, we knew there was accuracy in that documentation. And I think that's what we're going to try to do this summer, right, is try to find what are the other small groups on campus that have their documentation really sound, that we can kind of use to train an AI agent or train a model and build an agent. But you go ahead and make sure that I'm kind of covering.
No, I think that's a really good example, both in a lot of ways, because to my layman's perspective, an AI agent is particularly valuable when it's digesting a fixed universe of high quality information. And our controller's office is that. Everything they do is governed by rules and regulations. So it's a very specific, very fixed pot of information. It would be harder if we were asking that agent to analyze political science based on the New York Times, because that's constantly changing and it's very fuzzy. So I think identifying low-hanging fruit, where we have those fixed constellations or universes of high-quality information, and then letting the AI make our jobs easier. The controller's office, the pressure that I think we're relieving in their office is the constant barrage of phone calls from people saying, how do I do this? How do I do this? So, and I'm guilty of that. I don't do expense reports very often. So when I have to do one, I wind up having to call somebody. And I think you're the one that reminded me, hey, there's an agent that will help you do that. So
I've never seen Larry that mad, listeners. I could tell he was frustrated. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm trying to submit an expense report. And then he was a CFO for a longer, or COO. So we never had to do this. He didn't, he had somebody else do it for him, but it was entertaining, Larry.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I could provide some entertainment. I have a couple of things that you commented on that I want to react to. You know, one, talking about training with artificial intelligence, I think we have to do some contextual training as well, artificial intelligence in our environment, because we had a situation where a person at a particular department was generating tons of emails as part of their job, and they chose to use artificial intelligence to help them write the emails. And the email came back full circle to their supervisor from one of the customers saying, hey, this is a really poorly written email. And the employee said, well, it has to be right because AI wrote it. I didn't write that, AI did. And if my signature block is on the bottom of the email, or my email address is the send from address, there needs to be an understanding. I own this. I may have used artificial intelligence to help me generate it, but it's generated over my name. I own it. I don't necessarily think everybody understands that. So
no.
You can delegate authority, but you cannot delegate responsibility. And the other one, you were talking about faculty, and something you said struck me. You said we wanted to go to the tenured faculty who are protected and can have the hard conversations, don't mind speaking up to us, and that's actually right. But the other reason to go to tenured faculty is they are also the ones who are protected, and they don't have to do anything differently if they don't want to. And so we need to persuade them early on that they will model the way, and they will show the non-tenured faculty. Non-tenured faculty, that can be coercive to the degree that it needs to. But with tenured faculty, you know, it's all carrot, no stick for the most part. And that also made me mindful of reassuring faculty that the biggest part of their job is not something that AI can reproduce. And I'll use my mentor, Dr. David Ray, was the guy who got me through undergraduate and graduate school and turned my brain on as a student. If I ask Dr. Ray a question about something in his lecture, and he turns around to the bookshelf just covered with books, stacked three deep, and digs around in his bookshelf and hands me a small cheap paperback book and says, this answers your question, I have a high degree of confidence that he's read it. He found it in that book stack. He owned it, he read it, and he's given it to me to read now. If I go to Gemini and say, give me a book about such and such, I have no degree of confidence whatsoever, that it doesn't have that same emotional reassurance of having the faculty member have a 20-minute conversation and then pull a book, or describing to a faculty member an intellectual or a challenge that I'm facing in the class, and having her or him rely on years of experience in the classroom to answer that. It isn't the same. And so I think one of the things that we'll need to be mindful of is making sure that we reassure people that there are huge chunks of all of our jobs that AI just can't replicate. They can support it, they can help it, they will probably shape it and change it over time. But the human contact in the classroom, that can't be replicated by artificial intelligence.
And it can't. And I think that's what makes me feel so confident in higher ed's ability to sustain. I think to be around, to be of significant importance to a liberal democracy and all that. And I think I'm up in the mountains for a retreat for our academic affairs leadership, the provost leadership team, and there's 15 of us, AVPs, deans, and yesterday we were talking about what are we going to do to demonstrate the value of our degrees. And somebody said, I think it was Terry Bauer, said, well, why aren't we talking about, Sam, why aren't we talking about, where does AI fit into this? And I said, all of the stuff that we're solving for needed to be solved. All of it, AI is going to do nothing but either amplify the good stuff about this or help us realize that sort of knowledge, what we would be teaching right there, we don't need to do that anymore. Let's now go a little bit higher level, a little bit deeper on this thing, right? So for example, teaching the basics of building an Excel spreadsheet, right? That is something that Greg Clifton, our chair of accounting, used to have to do, right? I teach my students, here's how you do an Excel spreadsheet. That is gone away. I don't need to do that anymore. Now I can move that maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks of learning or teaching, right? Now I'm going deeper, faster. And I think that is what is so exciting is I think we can expand the knowledge that we're able to share with our students just because AI can sort of take on a lot of the basics. I don't mean like learning how to learn. I mean the sort of technical specifics, that sort of stuff, right? Like it that becomes not as needed when I can go and ask the machine or have the machine run these first 2 steps. It's the critical thought and discernment that is central to keeping a human in the loop that we're going to have to focus on.
So the distinction that I'm hearing is AI is easily capable of taking over training. Much more challenging to have AI take over education. It can support education. Training is this is how you build a spreadsheet. Education is this is why you use a pivot table here versus there. Language is saying AI. I'm using an AI tutor on German to teach me German words, and even the pronunciation now. Like I could always get out a dictionary and learn the words, but now there are AI tools that are interactive. They say the word and I say it back, and they connect my pronunciation. They can't help me write poetry, and I'm not even sure if there is German poetry, to be honest. But they can't help me with how I use those words for their best effect. They can maybe help, but they can't make that decision for me.
That is such a good analogy. Like that is such a good example because those sorts of tools have been around for a little bit. Duolingo, I think about that, like teaching me how to speak Spanish. That doesn't prevent me from looking like a real ass when I go to Cancun, right? It just doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't teach you the context.
There was a really funny a joke about a student actually who was trying to use ChatGPT, and he said, "Hey, can you help write a poem for my GF?" And they talk in abbreviations like they do in text. And ChatGPT wrote a beautiful poem for my girlfriend, but he said I meant GF grandfather, not girlfriend. and so there are limits. I mean, it goes back to our point. You've got to learn how to write the prompt. If you don't write the prompt correctly, you're not going to get the answer that you were looking for. Thankfully, the student realized it was a wrong poem and didn't send it to his grandfather. But these are interesting musings and ramblings, and I sometimes wonder if the meandering conversations that you and I constantly are having, how constructive are they? And I guess we'll know in a few weeks after we talk to the board, have we accomplished what we wanted? Does the board feel like we know what we're talking about? Does the board feel like we're comfortable with this? Do we have the right governance structure, but not too much of it? Have we identified the right buckets? We'll know after the board meeting next month. But I think this is really constructive. I don't think these conversations could happen in an AI environment. We couldn't have two AI agents having this conversation and get the same benefit from it by reading the transcript. No. But I also think one of the values of the podcast will be other people will chime in. We'll have a sociologist come on and talk to us about disruption. Love to have a labor economist come on board and talk about what they think what they're anticipating in the next year, 5 years, and 10 years.
This summer will give us a lot of opportunities too, I think, to bring in not just those faculty that you mentioned, making sure that they're around, but I would love to get Kevin Taylor, our CIO or CTO, on there. I mean, the people that are making decisions about this stuff with sort of the same pressures or expectations that we are. I mean, we're trying to help Kevin and Mike Hart, our CISO. We're doing our best to support them. But at the end of the day, I mean, I can't imagine being Kevin Taylor, like the stuff that's keeping him up at night, because he's getting hundreds of requests for models and access to, can we turn this on into our entire Microsoft environment, or, to Buffy Ribble and what's happening to EDW, our data warehouse? Like, can I turn this on? Like, that's going to cost some lost sleep, because that's really like this confidential information, all that. It would be nice to get into their heads a little bit. But I've got to run to this retreat. Your comment about the value of these ramblings, I mean, we're calling it thinking out loud for a reason, right? That's what we kind of wanted to do, and I think we're getting there. But we will we'll kind of close up shop for today and return next week and kind of go through a little bit further potentially about our process as we prepare for the board. But I think we'll probably want to drill down a little bit more on these different buckets. But Larry Sampler, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Wonderful conversation. Everybody, listeners, thank you so much for listening. As always, if you've got questions, comments, email us, ai@msudenver, and have a wonderful afternoon or weekend or whatever time of day it is when you listen to this. So thank you, Larry.
Cheers.